Hi guys, welcome back to the 5th lecture of the Android course. Before I start, I want to apologize for last week's audio during the demo. I realize it is very scuffed. Kevin was almost tempted to send me a microphone to use, but I'm just recording this on my phone. So hopefully the audio turns out fine, otherwise Kevin might have to pull some Final Cut Pro magic. So this week we'll be talking about fragments. Before I start, we have a few announcements. Grades for homework 3 will come out on Wednesday instead of Sunday. If you have any pending regrade requests, feel free to reach out to us on Piazza. We're a little disorganized with keeping track of regrade requests, so it would be great if you can reach out and give us a reminder. Office hours are still held every Thursday. You do need to sign up for them, and I think you need to sign up about 12 hours ahead. If you can't make office hours, you can also make a private Piazza post and drop in your error message and also your code snippet, and it can help you debug over there. And I do realize that homework 4 was a bit lengthy, so we will keep homework 5 fairly short, just because homework 4 and homework 5 rely on each other. And we will be starting the final project next week, and basically you guys will be able to create any app that you want. There are not a lot of requirements, so it's a good idea to start thinking about app ideas now. So we've been name dropping fragments a lot throughout the semester, so basically a fragment at its very core is an Android component that allows you to reuse different UI elements across screens. So here is a screenshot of the 3 different screens on Eatery. These 3 screens actually represent 1 activity and 3 fragments, and that 1 activity is reused across all 3 screens. So you'll notice that there are some shared components across all 3 screens. This is the app bar at the top and then the bottom navigation bar at the bottom. And so these 2 components exist inside the activity, and all the code related to those components are also inside the activity. But the area between the area between the app bar and the bottom navigation bar actually belongs to fragments. So you'll notice here that there are 3 different fragments with their own layout. And so fragments live inside activities, and they are not declared inside a manifest. That means that the code base doesn't actually care about fragments during compile time. They only care about it during runtime. So why should you even use a fragment? Fragments seem very similar to activities. They are similar in that they're both sort of like layout containers that can contain other view groups and other UI components. The main reason why you want to use a fragment is so that you can reuse UI components. You could technically recreate the UI components on every single screen, but as your views become more complex, it's a lot easier to just recreate it in one screen and then just reuse it across all the other screens. The second reason why you want to use a fragment is to add more modularity to the app architecture. This sort of follows like a programming philosophy, but you want to make your code base as modular as possible. This means you want different screens and different fragments to be independent of each other. This allows for greater flexibility, so if you decide to remove a fragment because you don't need that feature anymore, or if you want to move it to a different activity, it won't interfere with other components inside the app. And this also allows for greater scalability, because if you want to add new features to the app later on, you can do so by just adding a fragment instead of having to rearrange activity around. And finally, you want to reduce redundancy inside a code base. Normally, if you're coding by yourself, it may not matter as much, but if you're working on a project with a larger team, you want to make sure that if you write code in one place, that code only exists in that single place. Otherwise, if someone else decides to work on the same code, they might not realize that you have to change the code twice in 2 separate places, and allows for more bugs. So in terms of lifecycle, fragments have life cycles just like activities, and they are basically the same lifecycle methods. The main difference is that fragments' life cycles are tied to the host activity. So this means that if I decide to remove fragment 1 in this example, it won't affect the activity and it won't affect fragment B. They will exist as is. But if I decide to remove the activity, then fragment A and fragment B will be destroyed as well. So how do you integrate a fragment into an activity? Kevin will go into more details about how to actually do it inside the code base. But there are two ways, one way that we recommend and one way that we do not. One of the ways that you can add a fragment to an activity is through the fragment tag in XML. This is basically hard coding a fragment into the activity, and this is not recommended just because it breaks the modularity rule. And it doesn't allow for several fragments to exist inside of an activity. Ideally, you want the fragments to switch in and out instead of just laying on top of each other. The recommended way, and the way that you'll see inside our demo, is through an existing view group. So this can be a linear layout or a coordinator layout. And basically you have a layout that acts as a fragment container, and you can put fragments inside and swap them in and out. And Kevin will show you how to do this inside a demo as well. So there are two classes that are needed to do this. One is a Fragment Manager and one is the Fragment Transactions. So Fragment Manager basically manages all the different fragments in one activity, and Fragment Transactions are different actions that are applied to a fragment. And that includes creating a fragment, launching it, and also caching it. Here is a code example of what that may look like. You can see that we create a fragment manager, and then we create a transaction, and then we create the fragment, and then you just add the fragment to the fragment transaction and just commit it. So in terms of just like launching a fragment, it's actually very basic, as you see here. The hard part is actually sharing data between fragments. So this is a topic that confused me a lot when I first started working with fragments. And that is because if you want to share data from fragment A to fragment B, you would think that you would just directly send the data, but actually this is not possible. The main reason why is because it breaks the modularity rule again. You want all the different fragments to be independent from each other. That way, if you were to just remove one fragment from the code base, it shouldn't affect the other fragment. It shouldn't create any ripple effects inside your code base. So the correct way to do this is by polling the host activity. And so basically you want to send fragment A's information to the activity, which goes back to fragment B. And in terms of steps, you would create an interface in fragment A. You will implement that interface in the activity and create your bundle of data. And then you will retrieve that bundle in fragment B. And so the steps by itself right now don't seem that difficult. But if you have a lot of fragments or you have a lot of different types of data, you could be working with a lot of different interfaces and your code base can get a little bulky. So there are other solutions to share data. You don't need to know these solutions for the homework this week, but it may help you during the final project if you find that making a lot of interfaces is a little difficult to manage. You can use a singleton class, you can use live data by Google, or you can use a database. So basically a singleton class is a class that has a static reference and is only created once, and it kind of works like a pseudo database where you just like dump information into it and pull it back out like a getter setter class. Live data is what Google provides as a solution to this problem, and it relies on state management. It's a little hard to pick up at first, but once you get it, it's not that difficult. And finally, you can use a database. Either this is a local database, inside of your app, or this is an external database where you can just call its API. So overall, you may be asking yourself, how do I know when to use a fragment and when to use an activity? And the answer is really up to you. There's no one right way to use fragments over activities. It kind of depends on your philosophy behind like architecture and just like how to build apps a certain way. The reason why there is no right answer is because Google doesn't provide a right answer, and also because the opinions about fragments activities changes year to year depending on what like the top Android developers suggest as a solution. Yeah, so that's it for the lecture. It's super short. Kevin will be doing a demo and hopefully showing you all the things mentioned inside the lecture.
Hey guys, welcome back to lecture 5 of Intro to Android Development. We're going to be working on fragments today. So to start off, that's a lot of lag in the system. All right. Let us prep an activity to take a fragment. So fragments are the components that essentially are mini activities inside your app, except that they can have they can be put inside activities so that you don't have to change the screen that you're on. So just gonna bind this to all sides and give it a name like fragment container. I'm gonna let it match the constraints that I give it, and then move this down by, say 100. Yeah, perfect. So that should contain fragments now. So from then on, let's make some fragments. A fragment, you can just directly go into fragment and create blank fragments. But let's do it the yeah. So we can just go into fragment, create a blank fragment with XML layouts and some nah. So let's call this RGB fragment and finish. So you'll notice this comes with a simple class that extends the class fragment and has both an RGB, like just a public constructor, and an onCreate view. That's all you need for a fragment, and then just a layout with something in it. So we're gonna try to replicate what the So we're gonna try to replicate what one of the earlier assignments did and send some data from a slider from a seek view bar over to another fragment. So I'm just gonna put some fragments on some parts on screen, like so. That extend there. That extend there. And I'm gonna name this seek bar red. This is gonna have a matched layout, and I'm going to give this a max value of 255. Yeah. So from there, I'm just going to go into the secondary view. Can I just say, this is something that the new Android Studio does really, really well, in that it allows you to have both code view, code and preview view, and straight up WYSIWYG editor. And I love that. it makes development so much easier for when we want to just see everything you're editing right on the side. So, the red one, I'm going to add a bottom constraint to move it up a bit, and the blue one, I'm going to add a top constraint to move it down a bit. And that looks great. All right, so now to put that fragment inside our main activity, we just create a fragment manager. So a fragment manager, as implied, manages fragments. So give it a name and get a simple support fragment manager. Then set up a fragment transaction and give that the fragment manager and begin a new transaction. Transactions are Android's way of sending of taking fragments in and out. So in this case, I'm going to create a new RGB fragment, call it fragment, and make it a new fragment. New RGB fragment, sorry. And from there on, I'm going to take the transaction manager and add that fragment. First off, I'm going to give it a quick pointer towards what I'm putting it in. And then from there, I'm going to set the fragment to it. And then commit that transaction. That should... quiet. So here was the original screen. And now once that builds, that should give us a screen with a bunch of bars. And you will notice it's offset because this was the size of the container it was put in. So you can now just put windows inside windows, essentially. And then from there, this is not very useful, is it? You've essentially done what we were going to do anyway inside the main activity and just put it somewhere else. But now we can also have other fragments and move them in and out. So I'm going to create another new fragment, make it blank. Don't give me a bunch of extra methods, please. And let's call this a color fragment. And now inside the color fragment, I'm going to then toss this, convert this to a constraint layout, and let us give it a simple linear layout that we can constrain to all sides, force it to match the constraints given, and actually don't force it to match the constraints given. Give it a size, a very specific size. All right, and then call this the color display. This, because I can't spell today. And now, inside main activity, let's do a few more things. I'm going to give it a few quick buttons. These buttons are going to be the tab 1 and tab 2. So I'm going to set this with I'm going to give this a 25. Yeah, sounds good. And then duplicate the button. Call it tab 2 with all the benefits that the number 2 gives. And then set its bias to 75. So it ends up on the other side. Great. And now in main activity, button tab 1 equals find v by id r.id dot tab 1. Yep, let's add the import for that. And similarly for button dot tab 2, let's swap in tab 2. I said button dot. And then from there, we can give them on-click listeners. And let's start moving fragments in and out. So essentially, you just use the same code over again. Here, we will, for tab 1, we want to put the RGB fragment in, because that is our original one. So fragment, actually, let us copy this code. Let us make the fragment transaction again. And let's use replace now that there is already a fragment there. And we're done. And similarly for tab 2. So I'm going to move in all the same code. And instead of RGB fragment, I'm going to call this the color fragment. And that'll do just fine. Needs to be declared final. It is. And from there, actually, this one isn't enough color. I'm gonna give this black. Yeah, there we go. That's more visible. Reset it. So now, clicking tab 1, we're here, with all the fun little benefits that gives. Clicking tab 2, we're here. Tab 1, tab 2, tab 1, tab 2. Note that when I go back to tab 1, it's reset. Everything here is reset. That's because I didn't save the state of these sliders when I went back into tab 1, so they come out. So essentially, this activity is being recreated. This mini fragment is being recreated each time I come back into it. So now let's get on to the useful stuff. Inside our RGB fragment, let's start getting some of that data. So in here, let us create a view, call it the root view. This is the view that everything is held in, and it is equal to what the inflator returns. So this is the pre-built code for taking the layout and inflating it with the data. And so inside here, I will set a bunch of seek bars up. Red, green, blue. Actually, yeah. And root view that find view by ID, because you can't actually do regular find view by ID inside a fragment because it's not always there. So you have to find the view based on the root view. And from there, I want the red bar. Thank you. Paste. Green. Blue. Green. Blue. And then these should be able to get data. Now, there's one more thing required for sending data between activities and fragments, because they're technically separate classes and thus are not directly connected to each other, nor is it a particularly good idea to instantiate a main activity inside the fragment you call a main activity method. Thus, the way you go about it is you send, you create an interface inside your fragment. So call it public interface. Let's say data bus, because that's what ECE makers call it. You might instinctually go for a set of parentheses here. Please don't, that will break the interface. That's how Java works. And then it will be a public void on slider changed. And I'm going to give it an int r, int g, int b. set up the new onAttach method, and in there, go set up the data bus as attached to that. So data bus, nope, data bus, and then attach here. So context, context data bus. No, sorry, wrong way around. Data bus, context. There we go. That should attach whatever has this to the file. So in here, we will implement, it will make more sense here. We'll implement the method called data bus. And it'll tell us if I implement it, I have to implement the methods. So I will implement an onSlider changed. Now main activity is of type data bus as well, so that when main activity is attached to, the fragment is attached to main activity, we can now save that main activity as a part of this fragment or a pointer to it. So from here, I can do red dot set on seek bar change listener on new on seek bar change listener. This is very bulky. I need this to go away. And in here, I can just do data bus dot slider changed, red dot get the progress, green dot get the progress, and then blue dot get the progress. And repeat this for green and blue. Is this a bit inefficient because I'm calling all three sliders each time only one is changed? Yes, very much so. Does it suit the purpose that I'm just demoing for you? Yeah, very much so. They are all final. And then we're just back in main activity and we can change things around from here. So in here, what will we do if we have the slider change? Well, we have an int array called color, which is equal to new int array of 3 variables. So I'm going to set color color 0 equals R, color 1 equals G, color 2 equals B. And then main activity should be receiving the correct data. I'm going to do a quick log.e data from RGB fragment. And then we'll print out color toString. So I'm going to open up the logcat and set up our new slide. Does it not actually, come on, does it actually not print out the, that is a failure of Java. JavaScript would have printed anything. It would have printed the entire object. Just dumped it right out for everyone to see it. No, this you have to be picky. Alright. I can deal with picky. Picky's fine. So, ta-da! And now you can grab data from the fragment. Perfect. Just going to comment that out. Now, how do we send the data back into the next fragment? I want to send it over to color fragment, let's say. Well, that's actually easier than you'd imagine. So, in here, fragment dot get arguments, and then you have to put in a bundle. Set arguments, and you have to put in a bundle. A bundle was the thing from the earlier activity demos where we showed you how to send data from one activity to another. So I'm going to create a new bundle. I'm going to bundle in put int. I'm going to put an int array, color, and then I'm going to put in the color int array. And then so fragment dot put dot set arguments. Yes, there we go. And then we put in a bundle. So this should constantly be tracking the color from here, which is constantly being set by this. And then every time we launch the color fragment, I should be able to go in here. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did for the RGB fragment, where I set up the root view. Wow, I could not copy paste code from there. That was awful. I'm writing messy code. Do as I say, not as I do. So in here, I'm going to get the arguments back from the bundle. You might be confused because there is a bundle here already. Don't use that. It's not the arguments you wanted. This is not the Jedi that you're looking for. So from here, I'm going to set up the int array called the color again, and get it from the bundle. Get int array color. And that should be received now. And from there, all I have to do is review.get find view by ID, and I will find that ID dot color display, set the background color to color dot RGB. No, that'll do. Color 0, color 1, color 2. And that should pass it on to the color fragment. So, right now, this is going to be a black. That is correct. This is going to be a bright red. That is correct. Green, blue, anything in between. All right, looking good. And so, yeah, so that was how you create fragments. That's how you get data from the fragment to the activity. And that's how you send the data from your activity over to the fragment again. So through this, you can do a lot of things in the app now. So you don't have to move off your activity anymore. It can be nice and fluid. And you can create animations where you have these things slide to the side and have another screen show up, and then slide it back over and have that screen back again. And it's very fluid. It doesn't have that jumping from one screen to another that you might have with just switching between activities. And which is why this is preferred by a lot of people in industry. Actually, a lot of people in industry directly just swap out the views in there instead of just swapping whole activities out. But that's besides the point. This is what Google recommends for what you should be doing in these situations. So yeah, that was Fragments. I hope you enjoyed the lecture, and I'll see you next time.